For 16 years, we've been building a site that's been called innovative, insightful, and informative. Now there's a new name for it. We're now NBCnews.com.
In the weeks after the murder of her husband Scott, Catherine Pierce was still living in the home where he had been killed by mistake. Instead of moving out, Catherine cleaned up the bloodstains and stayed. She says she was determined to face her own fears.
I began to get up in the middle of the night and kind of walk through the house with the lights off, just so I could get that out of my system so I wouldn't be afraid of it. I walked down the hall without the lights on. I went to the back door. I let the dogs out.
You walked through the kitchen.
I relived it over and over and over again.
And that made it easier.
If you repeat something over and over and over again, it lessens a little bit every time.
But Catherine was also facing a broken-hearted truth that she'd lost the love of her life.
I had no idea what my future would hold, especially in the romance department.
You could not conceive of ever finding that kind of love again.
No, I could not.
And now the detectives who'd quickly closed the case by getting a confession from that armed intruder, Clifton Bloomfield, were about to realize they weren't done with either Bloomfield or Catherine Pierce. That's when the crime lab here in Albuquerque got a hit on Clifton Bloomfield's DNA. But it had nothing to do with the murder of Scott Pierce. This was a DNA sample left at the scene of a completely different Albuquerque homicide. The killing ground was in this neatly kept home in 2007, some 6 months before the murder of Scott Pierce. The murders of Tak and Pung Sil Yi had been front-page news and sparked citywide outrage and fear. The Yis were beloved figures, pioneers in the city's Korean-American community. They'd come to the U.S. in the 70s, worked multiple jobs, raised 4 successful children, and lived the American dream. Mr. Yi had just retired so they could travel. And then they were murdered in their own home. Detective Mike Fox had a personal connection to the case.
He actually was my neighbor at one point, so I'd see him out gardening, and very pleasant man.
Not a neighborhood where you would expect this to happen.
No. This is another crime where you have a victim that hadn't done anything to deserve it.
And the crime Detective Fox and his colleagues had investigated had been especially vicious. Mrs. Yi had been beaten and suffocated with a plastic grocery bag. Her husband had been beaten to death. But before he died, Mr. Yi took a swipe at his killer, and his DNA was found under Mr. Yi's fingernail. Police now knew it was the DNA of Clifton Bloomfield. He had not even been a suspect in the murders.
Part of me was shocked, but part of me was like, makes sense. The brutality of the murders.
News that Bloomfield had committed 2 more murders sent a shockwave through Catherine Pierce.
I realized that I really could be dead. He could have killed me for fun because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Or because you possibly could have identified him.
Anything. Why leave a witness behind? It doesn't make any sense that he left me alive.
The story gets stranger. Before getting the DNA hit on Bloomfield, Albuquerque police and prosecutors had already arrested, indicted, and jailed 2 other men who they believed were responsible for the Yi murders. One of the men had even confessed. But the DNA of those 2 men was never found at the murder scene. DNA now linked only Clifton Bloomfield. Those results came back from the crime lab just days after the murder of Scott Pierce.
My lawyer called me up and said, "We found something. It looks like he could have been arrested before he ever killed Scott."
I kind of get the feeling that it's also when you kind of began to get angry.
Yes. Somebody like that, why did it take so long to put him behind bars?
Catherine's lawyers, Ben Davis and Brad Hall. How long did it take them to test that DNA?
7 months.
And during that 7 months, Mr. Bloomfield was on the street, and one of the things he did was kill Scott Pierce.
Correct. They had 7 months to prevent the murder of Scott Pierce, and they chose not to do that.
Bernalillo County DA Carrie Brandenburg. Should police have submitted that DNA sooner than they did?
Hindsight, yes. At the time, it was done the way things are done. We have limited resources. We had cases that were going to trial that we needed DNA on, and so there's a priority.
So this was something that fell through the cracks.
I can't say that it fell through the cracks because that insinuates that something wrong happened, and I can't say that anything wrong happened. The process worked the way it always works.
But that answer wasn't good enough for Catherine Pierce. This widow was about to begin a crusade, and Clifton Bloomfield was about to come out of the shadows.
Coming up.
I'm not the monster you may make me out to be.
Haunting words from the killer himself. Catherine Pierce and you are about to hear his story.